Given everything this administration has done in such a short span of time, it's no longer enough to talk about headlines or spectacle. We need to talk about power, real power, the kind that moves quietly through financial transactions, corporate agreements, and backroom calculations while the public is distracted. This week, a $40 million media deal, a preemptively rejected documentary, and a federal raid on a journalist's home intersected in a way that reveals something far more serious than celebrity drama. It reveals how oligarchy actually functions in modern America. I'm Richard Hale, and in this breakdown, we're going to examine what's really happening beneath the surface, why billionaires are paying tribute, why journalists are being targeted, and what this moment tells us about the structure of power being consolidated right now. Stay with me, because this isn't about entertainment. It's about the architecture of influence being built in plain sight. Given the current events brought by this administration in a short span, we must discuss genuine power. Not the flashy kind or the distractions they want us to focus on, but the real influence, the kind that operates through financial transactions and secretive agreements while we're fixated on the spectacle. At this moment, there's a documentary nobody requested or wished to see, which an entire nation has already banned before its release. Hidden within this disaster is a $40 million deal illustrating how oligarchy functions in the U.S. This outlines why journalists are being raided by the FBI while covering this administration. It marks the point when billionaires decided democracy was negotiable, the First Amendment optional, and their profits more important than your rights. By the end of this discussion, you'll grasp why this is more crucial than celebrity gossip. This concerns the framework of authoritarianism being constructed right now, funded by individuals who should be impartial information providers. So, let's dissect it. Let's begin with the absurdity, because truly, we've earned the right to find some amusement here. Melania Trump rang the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange this week to launch her documentary on Amazon Prime, immediately giving us a snapshot of everything about this administration. The NYSE staff needed prompting to increase their applause. We have the footage. Lynn Martin, the exchange's president, visibly scanning the room, signaling for more enthusiasm because the clapping was so lackluster it was embarrassing. Remember 2016? This mirrors the please clap moment. This is Jeb Bush's political demise unfolding live. Except it's the First Lady at the NYSE. This moment was aired live on CNBC and Fox Business, both channels Donald Trump watches religiously. So, he saw his wife standing there while staffers faked enthusiasm for her movie premiere. After the bell rang, Melania gave the NYC chairman a high five and awkwardly hugged before they snapped selfies on stage. They presented her with a commemorative plate. That's what you get. A plate for making a documentary that claims to have the cultural impact of the Rolling Stones and Michael Jackson. I want you to hear her exact words. She claimed her documentary shares stories that inspire dreams, hope, tales of redemption, sad stories, love stories, and funny stories. Then she said, "We want to feel human. We want to feel human." That's the most mechanical sentence I've heard from someone who appears less organic with each public appearance. But that's not even the most delusional part. She genuinely suggested that watching her Amazon documentary was a gateway to entering American history. Enter American history by watching a propaganda film funded by Jeff Bezos about a woman who plagiarized Michelle Obama's speech and wore a jacket stating, "I really don't care, do you?" while visiting detained migrant children. But here's the kicker. South Africa just pulled this documentary from every cinema in the nation. A whole nation said no thanks before the release date. Film Infinity, the distributor, abruptly canceled the theatrical release, citing recent developments and concerns about how the film would be received, given the Trump administration's increasingly harsh immigration policies. Timing is crucial here. This decision followed right after federal immigration officers shot and killed 2 people in Minneapolis during an ICE raid. Renee Gadine and Alex Prey remember their names while Melania talks about entering American history. So an entire country looked at this documentary and said, "We're not partaking in this." That's a level of humiliation previously unmatched in cinema release history. I can't think of a bigger failure than having your movie preemptively banned by an entire nation due to the moral repugnance of your husband's policies. But here's the thing, and this is key. This was bound to fail with any genuine audience. Let me explain why. It reveals something about how MAGA operates culturally. MAGA doesn't consume reflective art. They consume outrage content. They consume grievances. They listen to lengthy podcasts where men complain about women having opinions. They don't watch documentaries requiring critical thought. Look at the trend. Kid Rock makes music for MAGA, and his sales are dismal. Scott Baio tries to build a MAGA acting career and can't secure roles. Every right-wing celebrity positioning themselves as the MAGA alternative to Hollywood fails commercially because their supposed audience doesn't engage with art. They engage with fury. This creates a paradox. Right-wing celebrities create content for an audience fundamentally incapable of consuming it because consumption requires attention span, reflection, and intellectual curiosity, all of which MAGA has systematically destroyed in their base. So if nobody's watching and a nation has rejected it, why was this documentary made? That's the question. The answer reveals everything. Here's what truly happened. Amazon paid $40 million for the licensing rights to this documentary. Not revenue sharing, not performance-based compensation, but direct cash deposited into Trump family accounts. $40 million. And according to Adam Schiff, Melania's agent has been pitching $10 million sponsorships to prominent CEOs and billionaires who attended the inauguration. What do you get for your $10 million, your name in the credits, and an invitation to the premiere? That's it. That's the deal. They're also reportedly pitching Hollywood on a show about Don Jr.'s hunting trips, a hunting show, which might be entertaining in the same way watching Dick Cheney go hunting was entertaining, depending on who joins him in the field. But let's discuss the Bezos calculation because this is where it becomes significant. Jeff Bezos owns Amazon. Amazon has a market capitalization of about $2 trillion. He acquired the Washington Post in 2013 for $250 million. Amazon Web Services has over $10 billion annually in government contracts. Blue Origin, his space company, holds contracts with NASA and the Department of Defense worth billions more. So, here's the math. Bezos spends $75 million total, maybe $100 million factoring in production and marketing costs for this documentary. In return, he safeguards $10 billion in annual government contracts. This doesn't even account for the regulatory environment regarding Amazon's e-commerce monopoly, labor practices, anti-UN campaigns, or the anti-Rust scrutiny they should face. $75 million to protect $10 billion. That's not a bad deal. That's an extraordinary return. And this is the business model. Media properties are no longer about journalism or profit or serving the public interest. They're tribute payments. They're loss leaders for other business interests. When Jeff Bezos acquired the Washington Post, some believed it was about civic responsibility, about a billionaire using his wealth to preserve important journalism. That was naive. And we know it was naive now because we've seen what he's done with it. This isn't about the Washington Post being profitable. It's about the Washington Post being useful. And it's useful when it doesn't ask tough questions about Amazon's monopolistic practices. It's useful when it softens its coverage of an administration that can threaten Bezos's other holdings with a single regulatory decision or a canceled contract. And Bezos isn't alone. This is a pattern. Mark Zuckerberg donated $1 million to Trump's inaugural fund after years of being attacked by Trump for supposed anti-conservative bias on Facebook. Tim Cook attended the documentary premiere at the White House. Bob Iger was at the inauguration. Sundar Pichai, the entire billionaire class, showed up to bow. They're not showing support. They're showing submission. And there's a distinction. Support implies agreement with ideology or policy. Submission is about power dynamics. It's about demonstrating that you understand who's in charge and that you're willing to comply with whatever is required to maintain your position. Now, some people see this and feel disheartened. They see the wealthiest, most powerful people in America yielding to Donald Trump and think, if they won't stand up to him, how can we? But I urge you to think about this differently, because there's something important hidden in their submission. If these billionaires are willing to yield to Trump, they'll yield to anyone in power. They have no principles. They have no loyalty. They have no ideology beyond protecting their wealth and expanding their empires. Which means, when we regain power, when we elect a president and a Congress that genuinely represents working people instead of oligarchs, these same billionaires will yield to us. They'll follow our rules. They'll accept our regulations. They'll pay our taxes because that's what they do. They yield to power. The problem isn't that they're too powerful. The problem is that we've been too afraid to use power against them. While we laughed at Melania's documentary flop, something much more serious occurred that didn't get enough attention. The FBI executed a search warrant at a Washington Post journalist's home in Virginia. They seized her phone. They seized 2 laptops, one personal and one issued by the Washington Post. They even seized her watch. Her watch. The administration claims this is part of an investigation into a government contractor accused of illegally retaining classified materials. The Post reports that investigators told the journalist she's not the focus of the probe, that the target is this contractor, but Attorney General Pam Bondi publicly stated that the journalist published illegally leaked information. Let me clarify what's happening here. They're criminalizing journalism. There's a law from 1980 that prohibits searching a reporter's home unless that reporter is the suspect in a criminal investigation. This isn't about investigating sources. This isn't about national security. This is about intimidating journalists who cover this administration by showing them that their homes, their personal property, and their private communications are not safe. And we know this because the Trump DOJ has already systematically weakened the policies that protect journalists. In previous administrations, both Republican and Democratic, there were strict guidelines about when and how federal law enforcement could pursue journalists in leak investigations. Those protections have been diluted. They've been weakened deliberately to make this kind of raid possible. This is not an isolated incident. This is part of a pattern. Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve Chair appointed by Trump himself, is being threatened for not lowering interest rates on Trump's preferred timeline. Career civil servants are being fired for perceived disloyalty to Trump rather than for job performance. ICE is conducting military-style raids in sanctuary cities, making arrests at schools and churches in direct violation of previous enforcement policies. Each move tests what Americans will tolerate. Each boundary crossed becomes the new normal. And then they push further. This is the authoritarian playbook. You don't seize all power at once. You take it incrementally. You create crises that justify emergency measures. You target institutions that provide accountability, starting with the media and the courts and the civil service. And you do it while half the country is distracted by whatever spectacle you've manufactured that day. The First Amendment isn't just one amendment among many. It's first because the founders understood that everything else depends on it. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, the right to petition the government for redress of grievances. Remove those, and you have no mechanism to resist tyranny. You have no way to organize. You have no way to hold power accountable. And that's exactly why they're targeting journalists now. Not because those journalists did anything illegal, but because journalism itself is the obstacle to consolidated authoritarian power. Look at the historical parallels. Every authoritarian government, whether left-wing or right-wing, whether in Europe or Asia or Latin America or Africa, begins by controlling the media. They shut down opposition newspapers. They arrest journalists. They create state propaganda outlets that masquerade as news, while actual journalism is criminalized, defunded, or intimidated into silence. We're witnessing that happen here in real time. While Jeff Bezos pays $40 million to produce a propaganda film for the First Lady, his newspaper journalists are being raided by federal agents. The transaction is complete. The tribute has been paid, and the warning has been sent. So, what do we do when billionaires enable this? When media outlets cave? When it feels like every institution is compromised, we remember something they desperately don't want us to know. The power dynamics are reversible. If billionaires will yield to Trump, they'll yield to progressive presidents. If they'll capitulate to fascism to protect their wealth, they'll comply with progressive taxation, anti-rust enforcement, and labor regulations for the exact same reason. They have no inherent power. They only have what we grant them. And their capitulation reveals weakness, not strength. Think about what we're seeing. The richest man in human history, Jeff Bezos, is so terrified of a spray-tan game show host that he's willing to destroy the credibility of one of America's most important newspapers and produce propaganda films for his wife. That's not strength, that's fear. And if they're afraid of Trump's power, imagine what they do facing a president and a Congress actually committed to breaking up monopolies, enforcing labor laws, and redistributing wealth. Let's talk about Amazon specifically because this is actionable. Amazon controls e-commerce, cloud computing, streaming entertainment, logistics and delivery, and now grocery stores through Whole Foods. That is a monopoly by any reasonable definition. We broke up Standard Oil. We broke up AT&T. We can break up Amazon, split the company sector by sector. Amazon Web Services becomes its own entity. The e-commerce platform becomes separate from the logistics network. The streaming service competes independently. When you break them apart, they can't leverage dominance in one market to crush competition in another. And suddenly Jeff Bezos can't buy political influence by threatening to pull government contracts because those contracts are held by independent companies with different ownership structures. Public support for breaking up big tech companies is over 60% in most polling. This is not a fringe position. This is common sense that's been blocked by lobbyists and bought politicians. And we need to talk about media ownership. No billionaire should own major news outlets, period. When your primary business interests can be affected by government policy, you have a financial incentive to compromise your news coverage. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's just economics, and we're seeing it play out right now. There are alternative models. The Guardian operates as a trust. ProPublica functions as a nonprofit. Neither is perfect, but both produce actual journalism because they're not beholden to billionaire owners who need to protect separate business interests. When Democrats regain power, and they will because MAGA governance is chaotic and destructive, and Americans consistently reject it when they see the results, we need aggressive anti-rust enforcement from day one. We need tax policies that make billionaire wealth accumulation difficult rather than inevitable. We need campaign finance reform that ends oligarchic political influence. And we need media ownership restrictions that prevent what we're seeing with Bezos and the Washington Post. But we also need to recognize what's happening right now. That gives me hope. Journalists are still reporting despite the threats. The Washington Post reporter who was raided, she's still working. Career officials in government are refusing illegal orders and documenting everything for future accountability. Sanctuary cities are maintaining their policies despite federal pressure. And citizens are showing up to counter-protest ICE raids to protect their neighbors to make it clear that we don't accept this vision of America. Every act of defiance matters. Every journalist who keeps reporting, every official who refuses an illegal order, every citizen who stands between ICE and their neighbor, every lawyer who files suit, every protest organizer who shows up. All of it matters because authoritarianism only succeeds when resistance collapses. And we're not collapsing, we're organizing. Here's what I want you to understand about Melania's documentary. It's not a failure, it's a success. It successfully demonstrated exactly how oligarchy functions in America. $40 million bought silence, compliance, and platform. It bought the neutering of the Washington Post. It bought access to corporate power. It bought the normalization of authoritarian governance, but it also revealed the system's vulnerability because they needed to pay, they needed to bow, they needed to show submission, which means they're not operating from strength. They're operating from fear. And if they're afraid of Trump, imagine what they'll feel when we elect leaders who actually represent working people, who aren't intimidated by billionaire tantrums, who understand that these oligarchs need us far more than we need them. They need our labor. They need our consumption. They need our compliance. And we can withdraw all three. So here's what I want you to take from this. They want you to feel powerless. They want you to look at billionaires capitulating and think there's no hope. They want you to see journalists being raided and believe you have no rights. They want you to witness ICE raids and accept that cruelty is the new normal. Don't give them that. Build alternative systems. Support independent journalism. Demand accountability from your representatives. Organize in your communities. And remember that every time they overreach, every time they cross another line, they're showing their hand. They're revealing that they know their power is illegitimate and unsustainable. Because here's the truth they're desperately trying to hide. They're more afraid of us than we should ever be of them. If this discussion opened your eyes to how this system actually works, hit that subscribe button. Leave a like if you're ready to fight back and drop a blue heart in the comments. If you made it to the end and you're committed to holding these oligarchs accountable, keep resisting. Keep organizing. Keep fighting. Because until next time, remember this. They haven't won yet, and they never will. As long as we refuse to surrender.